The public has a long-held fascination with detectives. Detectives see a side of life the average person is never exposed to. In this podcast series, I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin, I'll be interviewing a whole range of people you come across as a detective, including police, bad guys and victims. I spent 34 years as a cop. For 25 of those years I was catching killers. That's what I did for a living. I was a homicide detective. I'm no longer just interviewing bad guys. Instead, I'm taking the public into the world in which I operated. The guests I selected have amazing stories from all sides of the law. The interviews are raw and honest, just like the world they inhabited. No one who steps into the world of crime comes out unchanged. Join me now while I take you into this world. This episode of I Catch Killers contains conversations that some listeners may find confronting or triggering. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers with our guest, retired Detective Superintendent Deborah Wallace. Interesting part, first part, but now we're going to move into the land of Middle Eastern crime and gangs and taking on the bikies. I think we left part 1 where you were at Internal Affairs, and then you got promoted to heading up Southeast Asian crime.
Before that, I actually got promoted to Chief Inspector out in the suburbs again, back out at Green Valley, but I didn't actually start there.
You hid that from us.
Yeah, I never actually. It was in 2000 when the round of all those promotions came out, and I never actually. I think they went there for 3 weeks, and then there was some issues going on back at Cabramatta, so I was asked to go back there overranked because it was an inspector's role, and just have a look at what was happening in the police station and with the community as well.
Yeah, and did that feel good going back to Cabramatta?
You know, they say you should never go back, and I believe that, but it was for a particular reason. My heart was breaking because of what was happening out there with the police station was imploding inside, and the community was suffering outside because of that. So it was something I was never planned to do, but my passion was still Cabra even today. So it wasn't a bad thing to do, and it was only a short stint. I only stayed for another 3 years.
And what was your role there?
Initially, I went there just as, I suppose, a consultant to have it because the Olympics were on and there was a lot of politics going on at the moment. There was a parliamentary inquiry to police mismanagement of the area for the years 98 and 99. And in fairness, I mean, everything comes down to police mismanagement. But of course, Cabramatta was such a complex area that it's probably a whole lot of things was happening there. But the parliamentary inquiry was focusing on what police strategies were. And
that's where, when you've got the politicians interfering with the policing and then the community expectations and the media, it does get messy and complicated, doesn't it?
And it was, there was people with agendas and politics and bullying and a whole lot of stuff going on inside the police station. So that really 120 great cops and women and men and women out there had sort of lost their way because the people they were looking towards to lead them were arguing with each other. So the senior management and the middle management were just at each other's throats, which left the other cops with no direction. Like, are we allowed to lock up people? Are we not allowed to lock up people? So while that's going on, all that stuff is happening on the streets. So we've got these drug houses. You know, I think I counted 85 drug premises operating, which meant people buy their drugs, from fortresses, and then they don't want to go back and run the gauntlet to the police station where Puccini was still operating, walking 3 streets. So they all would have their drugs in the unit block. So we would just find a bed of syringes and overdoses and people lying around in comatose type states, and the community are trying to raise their children. Like, it was horrible. I
remember the time from homicide. We were always out there. It was bad times. You mentioned bullying, and that brings me to something that I found in your book, a way that you've got of dealing with bullies. Now, I'm going to read out a quote from your book.
Oh no.
If you ever threaten anyone, and I mean ever threaten anyone in this command, and I hear about it, I will rip those stripes off your fucking shoulders and shove them so far up your ass. Can you put that in context? Why you were telling that person that?
You know, I always say to people, it's a bit like when you send an angry email, send it, save it, and do it later. And I learned from that. So anyone out there that's looking to go into a command or a leadership position, think before you speak sometimes. But it was that they say that red hot anger. And what had happened, I was at Cabramatta and there's a whole lot of politics going on, and parliamentary inquiries and people giving evidence at the parliamentary inquiries. And the the staff there were given, there was a whole change of management. So I was there. There was a new region commander with Clive Small, the new commander Frank Hansen. So there was a whole thing we got new laws. Whole things were happening. We're doing drug operations. It was all moving, and the staff were really happy from what they were saying and everything. And they had so we have a police association, which is, I suppose, a union, and people were actually invited to give evidence at the parliamentary inquiry.
Right.
They were invited to anyone could give evidence about what their views of Cabramatta was, and the police were under the assumption, as we were, that they had to do a submission. Frank and I, the commander, Frank Hansen, we even said to them, if you all want to go away, or a group of you are nominated and go away, we paid for it to go to lunch at a club. Go and formulate your submission if that's what you've got to do, and you all agree, and bring it back to the group. And anyway, so we did all that, but unfortunately, interestingly, when we offered that out, only about 7 people turned up because they said, well, we've got nothing to say because we're happy. We've got everything we've asked for, like stable management, drug operations, we're happy. And then they were told by some misrepresentation, I believe, by some union people that they were required to give evidence, required to do a submission. And they go, but we don't want to. So there was
an agenda.
There was like almost like a loss of confidence in the local union representatives or association. So the head office association came out to try to quell this down. And they were fantastic, the senior officers of the association, and said, well, if you know what, the question was asked by a very brave sergeant on the floor, well, why do we need to do this? And he's going, I think it was Greg Chilvers at the time, said, well, you don't. You've just invited to. If you don't want to make a submission, he said, but we don't have to. And he said, no. And then they all looked towards the branch officials at Cabramatta and said, but you told us we had to. This is my understanding. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And they said, so it imploded into this, we want to do a vote of no confidence now, local. Anyway, it all settled down. At the end of it, apparently, and Frank and I deliberately had left the police station and gone up for a walk up the street to keep out of any politics.
Let the troops have their say.
And we came back and apparently one kid came out of the meeting 2 years in the job, and he was so pleased because we're on track, that we don't have to make submissions, all of this. And he's come out apparently very animated and said something like, we've won the power of the people, we don't have to be bullied. A few moments later, apparently, he got called into these were sergeants, some of them. I should say senior officers got called into the office and told he had to basically choose sides. If you're going to support management, then we'll make life hard for you. And by this stage, I didn't know any of that. And I've come back from a walk, and this young officer's turned up in my office, and he was very distressed. And I said, what's wrong? What's happened? And he said, I think I've just been threatened. And he told me what happened. And I said, if I say something, they'll know you've told me, and I don't want to make it worse for you. So what do you want me to do about this? And he said, well, you know what? We've spoken up a few hours ago down in that meeting and it all worked out. So if I don't make a stand that this is the new way we're going forward, then who does? It has to start. So I went down there and I was seeing red because this kid was so distressed, and I said those words. I would say to her, I do regret the tone. I suppose the outcome I don't regret because the kid knew that someone was standing up for him. But, I probably should have chosen my words wisely.
I think it's very clear and concise in what you're saying.
It's clear, all right.
If I rip those stripes off your fucking shoulders. So I don't think the person that you said those to had any doubt. But did that stop the bullying?
It did, because I think the start, I wasn't going away, and they knew that. So, but it was more importantly, it wasn't about me stopping the bullying. The staff weren't going to put up with it anymore. So I suppose it was the power, and they felt they were supported, which is the most important thing.
I think in leadership, and that's what it comes down to when it was imploding and all that, where the troops feel that their leaders are supporting them, it makes a big difference. And so full credit to you. And I'm amazed you got away with it. If that was me, I would have been charged.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe in another time and place I wouldn't, but I think it was the passion, and it was inappropriate I said it, but...
Well, I've always said policing is a robust business. Yeah. But, okay. Well,
passionate, I should say.
Passionate. We'll move on from that, and I don't think they can go after you retrospective. So, Southeast Asian crime, your time there, and then Middle Eastern crime. How did you come to or become the commander of MEOCS? It was interesting, I suppose, because I was lucky in 2005 to get the commander's position at Asian Organised Crime, which is so I surprised myself, and
And then there was a bit of a shuffle. The commander of the Middle Eastern Organised Crime Squad, Ken Mackay, got promoted to
He's
Chief
a
Inspector.
quiet, retiring type.
Yeah, an amazing detective. Iconic, that word iconic.
Yeah.
And the words, his nickname Slasher fits perfectly. I don't quite know where it comes from.
I have got to reach out and get him on this show. But yeah.
So he got promoted. So there was a vacancy. I think there was a couple other vacancies. And Dave Hudson, who's now Deputy Commissioner but was at the time Head of State Crime, decided before he filled them from outside or wherever he'd offer, which I thought was fair, people that have been there a long time, to present to him, do you want to change? It was simply as, does anyone want to move on? Now, one would think, that, maybe, I think homicide was fake. Do you put a hand up for homicide? I know that's...
We were spreading that rumour at one stage.
I think they were spreading it for armed hold-up squad. I think they have a heart attack. Yeah. Pink suits in the hold-up squad.
The stick-up squad would have never dealt with him.
So I really wanted Middle Eastern Organised Crime Squad because I still had that passion for uniform and the work that uniform police do, and I felt I related to that because I'd spent most of my career only been at state crime for 3 years.
Yep.
So Middle Eastern Organised Crime had that. They had the Highway Patrol, they had the uniform component, they had training detectives, and they had the detectives doing organised crime. So it ticked all those boxes for me. That was this really, really exciting environment.
And breaking it down, there was a proactive arm to it. And that's where we differ from how we've been approaching major crime, that we react, the crime occurs, and then we react. But MEOC's had a formula to try and be proactive, and the Highway Patrol going out and turning cars over, that type of thing.
Exactly. It's all that. It's suppression and disruption.
That's what drew you to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was absolutely that. And to say, well, not just wait till crime happens. These people have to drive cars. They have to carry guns. We can get, before they do the crime, we can do a whole lot of work around that and disrupt them. So that's what attracted me. So I went to Dave Hudson, and I remember walking in, and I think I was wearing another one of my bright, colourful suits, and I'm sort of stuttering.
Pink, blue or yellow? I'm just taking a guess.
It would have been, I think it was cobalt blue this day.
All right, okay.
And I remember saying to him, "Oh, Dave, I'd like to ask for a squad." He said, "Yeah." And I remember stuttering around, and I was making all these excuses, as women tend to do. "Oh, look, I understand if you don't want to give me this." And he didn't even know what I was asking for. I said, because before, we had amazing detectives like Bob Inkster with Gain, and then Ken Mackay and they're a particular style, and suddenly this bird in a pink suit is asking for Middle Eastern organised crime. So I understand politically if I'm not the right fit for it, but I thought and he's just looking at me stone-faced, and he says, "Well, do you want Middle Eastern?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I think it's yours."
Oh.
And it was as simple as that.
Okay.
So I suppose it's a classic case sometimes that we talk ourselves out of a job, not into a job.
And what year was that?
That was 2008.
So put that in context with what was happening. This was before the airport.
Sorry, 2000, and so it was just the airport had happened. I was away at the time, and I wasn't around at the time, so it was just before the airport.
Okay,
with the Brikers in 2009. So Middle Eastern had set up in 2006.
Because I'm just trying to put it into my framework, because I was at the gang squad, and there was the drive-by shootings.
Yes.
It was literally out of control.
Yeah, you're right, because before that we actually took on a big lot of drive-by shootings, Nomads, Hells Angels, which would have gone to the gang squad.
Yeah.
But it came to us. Dave, I think it was Mal Lanyon sitting in the chair, wanted us to do it at gang. So so Gain finished in 2003. Then I think or 2006. Then Gain set up, and then it turned into the permanent. Sorry, Gain was 2003 to 2006. 2006 was Middle Eastern was given the permanent structure.
Yep.
And I got there at the end of 2008.
Okay. And what we're talking about with drive-by shooting, so people understand, because we're talking a little bit of shorthand cop talk, but this was when Sydney was hardly a night went by where a house wasn't shot up. So I won't say random. They were more often than not they were targeted. But someone would have a falling out with someone else in a different gang or a rival group, and they would spray the house with bullets. And it was only a matter of time before innocent people were killed. And it was how to address that.
Yeah, and I think that's, one would say it's such a cowardly act because the house doesn't shoot back. And the trouble is, does it send a message? Perhaps, but it's, and the motive factor it can be as simple as you looked at me down the street or you disrespected me. And it was so, from low-level drug debts to organised crime base. So the motive factor was really difficult to get a handle on.
So as the commander, what was the approach that you adopted?
Look, we just took... we sort of, it sounds weird, we didn't really at that time worry about the actual shooting itself, because we knew that often these gangs would use very low level and shooting a house. And this is when people aren't hurt, of course, but we knew the risk if these continue. So we really went for every shooting we did. We obviously did some investigation, obviously ballistics and all that stuff you have to do. But because these people that were targeted had numerous enemies, to actually put the gun in the hand of a shooter at a house was probably never going to happen.
Yeah.
They say, oh, yeah, I had a gun and my fingerprints are on it because I held the gun once. So what we really went for...
And they were sharing the guns around
exactly,
deliberately to
exactly. Was well known.
make it difficult for
100% right. So what we would do is then go on a really strong, while the detectives are targeting on looking at their business model, so trying to disrupt them from that end by let's look at their totality of the criminality. If that we think that group's responsible, let's look what they're doing. Are they doing extortions? Are they doing drugs? What are they doing? And then the proactive arm, while that's all happening on the side, the proactive arm would go away and look at doing search warrants on any, for any drugs, et cetera, and looking for evidence of the group. But really, it was really suppression and disruption, because while we're looking at them, they worry if they go out into a drive-by shooting, are the cops on me tonight?
So it's fair to say, even if we suspected a group of or individuals involved in a shooting that we might or might not be able to approve, we target them for other stuff. So the pressure's on, and they know that we're watching.
100%. And we'd get them for, disqualified drivers, because we know that a lot of them had disqualified drivers, totally disrespectful to the law, that they have to drive somewhere. To do a shooting. So if they think, I'm disqualified, I might get up for that. So we'd do anything we could to disrupt them.
Disrupt.
Yeah.
And it was a novel approach to policing at that level for the major crime, because prior to that, or not prior, but there was very limited examples of proactive policing to reduce major crime. So.
Yeah, and I think it was looked on as, what do you mean? And what do you mean we're not going to investigate it? And of course we are, because someone's house gets shot up, and like you said, the chance of someone innocently in that house getting shot, of course it's important. But the most important thing is, thankfully, no one got shot on that occasion. So we need to stop the next drive-by shooting, not spend time trying to solve that one that's happened and no one got hurt. Let's stop the next one.
Yeah. Now, when you were at the MEOX, I think shooting of Fadi Ibrahim.
Yep.
That was an interesting one.
Yeah, and in his driveway, no doubt a true assassination attempt. And
he was shot 5 times.
Yeah, talking around in the stomach area, and one would say not point blank, but very, very close. Yeah. And I think it was knowing the Ibrahims have a certain reputation around Sydney as a crime family. And you think, what's going to happen next? Where's the fallout going to be from this? That they're not going to take this laying down. But then you're faced with the wall of silence.
That's just breaking that down a little bit, but that's another level of pressure that you have in shootings of this nature, that where's the retaliation going to come?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just investigating the crime.
Yeah.
It was how are we going to stop retaliation that's obviously going to come in some form. And
that's where that communication comes in, and exactly right. That, of course, someone's now shot, fighting for their life. And it's irrelevant whether, who it is. Yeah. One would say they probably expected it in that life, but it doesn't matter. Someone's going to be killed and fighting for their life, so they, that's what we're there to do. But we know then, as soon as we, the ranks close really quickly, and one would say, does that mean, well, don't worry about the cops because we'll take care of it ourselves, which is, another concern, because then we go tit for tat. And the wall of silence is, even when one of your relatives is laying there fighting for their life, you still won't help us. Yeah. And that just shows it's so disregard for the law.
It's that crazy code that they try to uphold. They don't always, but try to uphold. And I think there were charges that actually flowed on from that, retaliation.
Yes, we end up charging the what we would allege, and again, they were certainly acquitted at trial, but we did charge Michael and Fadi. Oh, not on his shooting. We didn't charge anyone with shooting of Fadi. Yep. But we charged a lot around that whole thing. But we did charge them, for want of a better word, because we realised that they were doing their own investigation, whether it's right or wrong to target who they thought was responsible, probably maybe not the actual trigger puller, but certainly who was responsible, which was a dispute with another crime family. And we heard that our investigation showed that they were going to kill him. So we had to move fairly quickly because they actually had the wrong address.
Yeah.
So we managed to charge them with conspiracy and some firearm offences, the fella that was going to do the offence, and it went to trial. But the first trial fell over. We got fair way into it, and it was, I think, going quite well. But it just shows you how careful we have to be in our court matters.
Yeah.
It's so sensitive around that time, and I'm almost paranoid when I'm talking to the media about not letting any chance. And on this occasion, it was progressing, I thought, quite well. The evidence was being, we had some witnesses, and of course it was a television station played. It was when some more drive-by shootings were happening.
Yes.
And the television news played a visual of these are the overnight drive-by shootings and arson attacks, and they hit. It was quite graphic. They put bullet holes and fires. And then they said there was a hotel in the Chippendale area owned by, and I don't know if they said it was owned, but certainly associated to John Ibrahim, which it wasn't. Absolutely nothing to do with John Ibrahim at all.
On that basis that the contaminated
they aborted the trial.
The jury.
Yeah, so they aborted the trial because the judge felt it was just too prejudicial. So it had the bullet holes.
Yeah.
And retaliation is what criminals do. And of course that was what the essence of the trial was about.
Okay.
So then they aborted that. We went back again for a retrial. But of course, you've played all your hands in the first trial. Your witnesses now saying, well, they went out, they fled overseas.
Yep.
So you got a much.
And they
were acquitted. They were acquitted.
Another time, and this you're going to get no joy talking about it, I assume, because it's such a it resonated with everyone in the MEOCs, but also across the police, was the shooting of Bill Cruz.
Yeah, I think we talk about those darkest days of your career, and we've all had them, and this was certainly probably the darkest day for me. And it was a search warrant conducted. As I spoke in Middle East, and we had the proactive team, mixture of young trainee detectives and detectives, and their job was to do that disruption.
Yeah.
When there's a crime happening. And we had a young fellow we normally didn't take people straight out of uniform. We had an amazing, experienced detective, chief inspector called Mick Ryan.
Mick Ryan, and
legendary, and one of the best crook catchers I've ever seen, and tough, and set the bench really high for performance.
He was very intense too.
Very intense. In fact, someone said to me, he's when you say detective, you should put him in the description because he looked like it. And we were very reluctant to take people straight from uniform because we wanted them to have some experience because of the turnover, the amount of search warrants, the pressure. And we would interview, every so often we would get a list of applicants, and sometimes we would interview them, and we'd obviously interview them, see, do we put them into uniform first? Do we say come back in a few years, etc.? And I remember Mick and I interviewed Bill Cruz from Campsie. And he was so huge impression on us, so doing and working in a proactive team at Campsie, so really mature and experienced above his years. And he left, and we said, we'll be in touch. And of course, Mick's got to manage his team, and I looked at Mick and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, Deb, I think he would be the exception. Yeah. I think we'll take him. And he said he's just got it. So Bill came and joined us 3 weeks later, and they, as TAG Action Group, as I was now, were doing their normal days, and an information came in from an informant to Dave Roberts, who was an acting sergeant at the time, a very, very experienced senior constable.
Yes.
20 years experience or 18 years experience, and he got information, and I'll paraphrase because it's a bit long, but got information from an informant who was on scene, so with an Asian fellow in Bankstown. And his job was more or less like a broker. His job was to receive cash from one Middle Eastern group and then hold it and receive the drugs from another group, and he would do the swap so that the two groups actually don't meet because they don't like each other. And the drugs and the money would be there for X amount of time, but it would be gone.
Yep.
It was cocaine, I think it was at the time, and about 50,000 cash. So the informant's telling Dave Roberts this, and Dave Roberts then has to approach Mick, who then has to approach me about the viability of doing the search warrant, because we normally don't do them at night.
Yeah.
They spent all afternoon doing as much as they could. They, did a surveillance of the premises. They spoke to witnesses who lived in the premises. They dragged up all the intel reports, everything they could do. They did. They had everything on track. And so I was convinced that the operation was a viable one to do that night, bearing in mind we didn't know the name of the offender, the Asian holder, but from people who lived in the unit said, oh, he's an old middle-aged bloke with a couple of kids. We think he pirates
due
videos.
diligence.
Due diligence. Well, certainly as far as we could do. They did a search warrant. So they just before they entered the premises, the call was made on the way there. No, still haven't seen any guns. Drugs are here. Pulled the informant out a few minutes before they entered the premises, and of course, what the unknown being, they didn't know the offender, Philip Nguyen, had said he'd been as a reasonable excuse, I suppose. He'd been ripped off by Middle Eastern criminals a few nights before, and that he'd been smoking heroin. So he's had this, probably a sense of paranoia. As the team approached and they announced their office, police search was all they got out. And he came out firing. And Dave Roberts and Bill Cruz slightly in front of Dave, was in the firing line and hit Bill firstly. And again, didn't do the investigation, but this is certainly from the reports. Hit Bill in the shoulder. Bill very bravely reached for his firearm to return fire. Dave Roberts also returned fire.
Yep.
And the most tragic of circumstances, we learnt later, the fatal shot came from Dave Roberts' gun, and Bill was dead on impact.
It's like I can remember it, but reading in the book just brought back the horror of it was for so many people, and with Dave Roberts and finding out that it was in fact his shot that killed Bill.
I remember, what I'd like to just acknowledge Ben Cruz and the family, and probably the most compassionate act I can ever imagine. It was the Sunday after, and they were having before the funeral, and I had to go because the commander's job is to, it sounds awful, is to take the hat. They had like a little thing set up, and I have to take the hat's protocol and give it to the funeral parlour.
So this was a gathering, not a wake because it's
no,
before the funeral, but it was a gathering
probably a memorial, sort of a pre-funeral memorial gathering, and it was amazing. It was huge. It was all the cops from Campsie, Bankstown, because Ben worked at Bankstown, and we got a call to say that MEOX, the team, including Dave Roberts, would be most welcome. That was from the family, and it was like,
it's pretty amazing.
Amazing. And I remember saying to the team,
because the family at this stage, you had told the
family.
They
found out from the homicide squad that it was Dave Roberts. They found out on the Friday. This is now the Sunday. Yeah, and I just remember the courage of this family, and we got the call to say they'd be most welcome. And I said to the team, it's up to you. You've been most welcome to be invited, but it's a matter of where you all feel, because they're all in different states of, you can imagine, trauma. Yeah. Particularly Dave Roberts, who was also quite medicated for his state. Yeah. And Dave said to me, I don't know whether I should go. It was mainly the others went. Dave was the one. I said to Dave, it's a matter for you. And he said, I feel like I want to, but I'm scared as well.
Tough call.
All the way there, we're talking on the phone about does he go, does he not go. I said, well, if you're on the way, it was up the M4, it was at Penrith, get out of the car and you can decide then. If you turn around, you turn around. He got to the car park, he's still going, I don't know. The dad said that they'd set up a separate room, not with all, there was hundreds at the other, in the main area. And he said, we've got a special room, I suppose you call it like a green room, where we're just there with the family. Yeah. The boys can come there first, and also Dave. So I told Dave this, Kel and Sharon, and I said, it's a matter for you. He said, okay. So it was sort of like one step at a time, and he walked into the one we call the green room, and oh God, he just fell apart, and the family would just embraced him, like it was just hugs everywhere. It was so emotional, and then it was a decision to go into the main area, and I said again to Dave, it's up to you, and he said, okay, I can do this because of the support. Yeah. And he walked in the room and the room hushed. It was like, oh my God, it felt like a minute, it was probably a few seconds, but the room hushed. Yeah. Because like all of us, the investigation was still being done. No one knew. I didn't know, and we just knew bits and pieces. And I deliberately kept myself out of any of knowing that because I didn't want to taint any evidence. Yeah. So I wouldn't offer a great deal of information. And I remember the hush, like his MEOX, like they went on this search warrant, and the word was out, no doubt it was Dave's the fatal shot, not knowing the full story, of course, of what actually happened. And it was Kel Cruz, the dad, came up and put his arm around Robbo and said, everyone is welcome here today. And it just sort of gave that permission. There's no blame here.
Yeah.
And then we carried on. Dave didn't stay very long.
It's amazing showing such grace and compassion, like putting your arm around the person that's pulled the trigger that's killed your son.
Yeah, and I have to say, Ben has been and the sad bit is Dave fought another battle years later when he got stage 4 lymphoma, and he lost that battle last year. But it was there was some experimental treatment that we were looking at trialling, and he set up a GoFundMe page. It was very, very expensive, and it was Ben Cruz rang me, who's now up the North Coast, and Ben rang me and said, could you just tell him, I don't want to trouble him because I know he's very ill, but could you just tell him that my family, I've been the first to donate. It's special. Yeah,
it is special, and that's the nature of policing. Things like that happen, and it's wrong if anyone sits in judgment of someone unless they've been in those situations where you're making split-second life decisions.
Well, I think the whole thing, Dave, I remember Dave sitting in the witness box at the committal hearing for the manslaughter charges against Philip Nguyen, and he had never seen the video, I believe, until that moment, for a whole range of good reasons. Not to, don't want to change.
Contaminate his...
And I think the whole thing went for 2.3 seconds or something, from the time they announced their office to the time, it was... It's putting it in that perspective.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and but like reading it in your book, and when the news was given to Dave, it was actually his bullet that killed.
I suppose that if we took even, we have a dark sense of humour, I guess, cops. And I remember the head of the homicide squad, Peter Cotter, it was his job to tell Dave, and Peter is a very talks very straight. He's a very good speaker, but he did it in such a I suppose an unemotional way.
Robotic, but not criticism. But
no, he had to do that because he was. I think he was feeling it as well. So there was Dave Roberts, his wife, me, Peter Cotter, and Darren Beachy, who then became my inspector later on, who's Dave's best mate. And Peter told Dave the outcome, and it was silence then. What's the reaction? So I said, how about a cup of tea? So I went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, and Dave came in and he said to me, Deb, I think I know what he said, but what did he say? Did he say I killed him?
So Peter Cotter's broken the news, but it didn't really
resonate because it was the way he sort of said, the fatal shot. And Dave said, does that mean I killed him? And I said, in simple terms, this is what you can understand. Yeah. That's what he sort of said. But anyway, I just remember Dave sliding down the wall, and just this howl like a wounded animal, and he just went into a fetal position. And Dave's a big bloke. He's 6'4" and big bloke, and at this point I'm going, okay, like I'm his boss, and so I looked at Darren Beachy to the side who heard the commotion, and I've signalled to Darren to come in, and I'm doing these sign language because Dave's sobbing in a fetal position, and I'm trying to say to Darren, you need to hug him right now. You need to hug him. And I'm trying to do sign language, and Darren just looked at me horrified, like, hug. So I've got down, and I've then able to. He just needed that tactile community, so I've got down and been able to embrace him and then get him to his feet, and he needed to be on his feet. He needed to be up.
Blokes are good at some things, but sometimes that emotion goes a little bit. But I know Darren would have felt it so deeply.
He was Darren was devastated.
It's just a horrible, horrible situation. Yeah. And as a boss, and you would feel like you're hurting for your troops.
Helpless.
Yeah.
Helpless.
Was there a feeling with the squad after that? Is there how did you get them back on? And I think there was something in the book where you said that. One of the guys in the squad just said, "Let's go out and do what we do." Yeah, Brad.
Champion.
That's right.
Brad Abdi did all the Ibrahim cases. He's just finished. He's just amazing
Let's
investigator.
go out and turn over the crooks.
Yeah, there was a few people didn't understand the story because they actually arrested, believe it or not, when they opened the garage where the drugs were going to be, there was 3 Middle Easterns in there who'd said, we didn't do anything but we have gunshot residue because we did some shootings on the way here, as you do. So they were charged with firearm offences. Yeah. So all the troops knew, again, I wasn't asking any questions because I didn't want to taint anything. The boys hadn't been interviewed or they were in the process.
Because there's a critical investigation that's run by homicide
critical
after
to keep away from
shooting.
it.
Yeah.
And so I needed to just get the troops, keep the troops as informed as much as I could. But so I was telling particularly the detectives, because the tag people were all off. We got them home. And there was a group, and often, sometimes we say empty vessels sometimes make a lot of noise, and there was the old chest beating, we need to go down to courts, we're going to go down, and thinking that the Middle Easterns perhaps were responsible. And I'm trying to...
Right, just to clarify that, you're talking some of the so-called tough guys. Yeah. We're going to... Yeah,
we're going to go down to court. We're going to be like vigilante. We're going to go down and revenge Cruzy. I don't know what they're going to do. Like, it's a court. They're in custody. But anyway. And I'm trying to calm emotions at this stage because we don't want to look unprofessional like vigilantes.
Exactly.
And I'm saying, okay, I don't want anyone's going anywhere. No one's going anywhere. We're just going to calm down and regroup and be here for each other. And one said to me in front of, there's probably 60 to 70 detectives, are you directing us, ma'am? Now, I didn't feel I had to direct. At this stage, are we going down that I have to direct you? And I was a bit lost for my next step.
A bit of a smart-ass comment.
Yeah, because, I'd been up, I'd seen these guys all night. And I was a bit on the edge, a bit raw as well. And it was Brad Abdi, a detective sergeant, one of the most highly respected. He stepped forward. He actually stood in front of me like a natural instinct protection. And he said, we're going nowhere. He said, if you all want to talk tough, and you want to do the best by Cruzy, then go out and find out, talk to your informants, get some guns off the street, get these, get guns that could kill people off the street today. Yeah. Make us show. They all, they listened to Brad because he was very, very influential. And Brad went out and led his team that night, and I think they did 7 high-risk search warrants with the TOU involved, and I think they got about 4 pistols off the street. Did the person that made a lot of noise? No.
Yeah.
So to me, but from didn't matter. Brad's view was, and I think I didn't speak for him. It wasn't anything. He just felt one of his own, cop, not his boss, not his commander, not a superintendent, is under siege here. So I have to step up. What a great show of leadership.
Yeah.
Brings out the best.
Well, that's to demonstrate that under the pressure. It's how leaders lead under that pressure environment and all that. But credit to you creating that squad, or having a squad that responds that way, because you've obviously got their respect. I know it was a tough thing, but moving on to next stage of your career, your life as a bikie.
Yes. I wear colours.
Yeah, you wear colours. That's not the type of colours. When did you take over Gang Squad?
That was in February 2014. 2014.
Okay. And what was the state of bikie land?
Look, it was pretty visible. That's I could do that term. It was visible, and bikies. They're a proliferation of organised crime. Most organised crime would like to fly under the radar. Yeah. Particularly the good ones. These are, to me, and again, I didn't know a lot about outlaw motorcycle gangs, their culture, and that, because I was focused on Asians and then Middle Easterns. Because learning from the Asian experience, you've got to know the environment. So I spent a lot of time wherever I worked getting to know the environment. So although certainly we were at Middle East and we had done a whole lot of drive-by shooting stuff between the Nomads and the Hells Angels around the Marylands area, I didn't have time at that stage to really dig down into their culture about what makes them tick. So that was but I did know they had a visible presence. The reason being that I lived in Parramatta until recently, and I would walk down they have this great area in Parramatta called Eat Street, which is all restaurants, really good. And I went to a good restaurant and I sat there and I looked across and there's a whole table of Hells Angels sitting at another table. And I thought, they're not doing anything. They're sitting there having a meal. But I knew the Hells Angels the information was that they were extorting businesses, in
the area,
alleged in the Parramatta area. So I'm thinking, is this going back to the old gang, 5T gang things? Like, you sit at a table, you occupy, you intimidate the things so they pay you money not to come back. Is this history repeating itself? But I felt to myself, if I'm a cop and I feel pretty safe, this is my area, I feel really safe, and I know they're not going to do anything, but it looks really intimidating. What is a family with their kids?
Well, you're not going to sit there.
You're not going to sit there. Yeah. This is an open, beautiful atmosphere. So I went back and I asked this question, and we at the same time we were hearing about the Hells Angels extorting businesses. Yeah. So we had a meeting with Parramatta Local Area Command. We always do partnerships because they own the crime. We get into support, and we're talking about this, and I was saying about Darren was there, Darren Beachy and Dave Adney, and we're talking about what we can do to stop this proactively. And I remember saying to a senior officer at the meeting, the worst bit was while I was sitting there, a couple of cops walked past. Yeah. I said, I don't know if they're from your command or somewhere, but they walked past and they didn't even stop to ask them their names.
Yeah.
And the senior officer, it was a commissioned officer, said, well, if they weren't doing anything, what right power did they have? And I said, well, anyone has the power to ask that question. You can ask, what flows from that, but generally they'll give you your name. You can at least interact because the community get to see you interacting, and if they're not doing anything, but getting names, good to know who's there, who's the new member of the Hells Angels, because that knowledge is power thing. And I was a bit shocked by that response. So we then worked fairly hard, and the whole point I said to Daz and to Darren, they've been there since 2009.
Can we just take a step back, because
sure.
I think it's interesting on Strikeforce Raptor, for the formation of Strikeforce Raptor.
Yep.
And when we talk about Darren Beachy and Dave Adney, and they were pretty formidable in the Strikeforce Raptor chapter of the New South Wales Police, but. Airport, when was the airport?
Airport was in 2009.
Okay, 2009. I was at Gang Squad then, and I was on call at Gang Squad as the inspector that over that weekend. And I'd been called to 7 places that had been shot up, that most of which were bikie related. And the police wanted it not coming out that there's a bikie war, and I was out all night, and by the time I was driving home mid-morning or in the afternoon, I got a call that what had happened at the airport. And those that don't know what happened at the airport, it was the Comancheros and the Hells Angels came to blows, and someone was killed in front of all the people at the domestic terminal. In response to that, because we were up against it in Gang Squad before then, because we didn't have Strikeforce Raptor. We didn't have a proactive arm. So we would investigate the crimes after they happened, but we didn't have the big stick to go hit the bikies with. And then after the airport thing, the public outrage, Strikeforce Raptor was formed. And Strikeforce Raptor were the proactive arm of the Gang Squad, where they'd go out and get in the face of bikies. Is that an apt way of
perfect. That's very similar to MEOX.
Yeah, and I think it was based on the MEOX model. You had Dave Adney, who was heading up Strikeforce Raptor.
There'd been a couple, but he certainly, when I arrived,
he was running. He was the one. There might have been ones before then, but he sort of stamped his authority on it. And then Darren Beachy.
Yes.
We're going to mention Darren and Dave. I just talk about Darren because I love this story. And I've punched Dave, and it's like hitting a brick wall. Darren, sorry, I should say.
It is.
And the rumour was that when you got the tough guys, and some of them were pretty big, coming into Raptor, they had to go train with Darren Beachy. And I've been training with Darren in the car park, and sometimes he would help me prepare for a fight. And it's like hitting the brick wall. And I used to laugh watching these big tough guys trying to go at Darren and him just tallying them up.
There was one story and about Darren, and Raptor had to be fit because that thing. So they had training sessions, and I remember Darren came to me, and he's Darren Beachy is a very unassuming, very quiet sort of guy, a deep thinker, and he came to me one day and said, I've got some bad news, boss. I said, what's that? He said, one of the staff will be off for some time. He's got to have surgery on his arm. The bicep's been ripped off the bone. I went, oh my God, is this so bad? Like, did it happen in a raid? Like, what happened? He said, we were doing our workout session, and we were doing he does some jiu-jitsu wrestling or something, and he didn't tap out. I went, what? He said he didn't tap out.
So Darren just ripped his arm apart.
What does that mean? It says, well, the idea is you hold him in a hold and the component taps out. So what happens? So he didn't tap out, yeah. And unfortunately, his biceps come off his bone. I went, oh, my God. So I said, no more jiu-jitsu, wrestling, fitness training only.
That might have been why we took it to the car park.
Yeah.
But that type of team morale that was so important in taking on the bikies, it was a tough task. So the other thing I like about Gang Squad, and then we'll talk about the clubhouses and that, was the fact, and you identified it, that the need to have people with all different specialist skills. So Raptor was a big arm, that was a stick that they would come in and stand face to face with the bikies. But you also had the intel people, and you had your detectives investigating the crime, and you were looking innovatively at different legislation. The type of legislation that wasn't readily used, but it was almost like, okay, it's there, let's use it to dismantle the bikies. So 2014, there was a start to push against the bikies, and they were pushing back, and that's the sort of environment that you inherited, the Gang Squad. And then at that particular point in time, I think there'd been a lot of backwards and forwards with the court matters, and you were starting to use the powers that you wanted to rely on. So.
Yeah, when I got there and saw this great team and the work had already been done, like there's a huge amount of groundwork done by both my previous commanders that had there and the staff, particularly like the Proactive Arms, Strike Force Raptor, and we sat down just talking one day and I said, look, I need to learn about these, so I need to understand what makes them tick, like what do they like, and we started whiteboarding it. They like clubhouses because they hang out. They like to wear colours because they can intimidate people. I said, I had to get the whole explain about what this colour thing was. They like to go on national runs, which means they all get together and ride down the highway. I went, okay. And they like to, own tattoo parlours. Oh, okay. So they like to intimidate. They like to extort businesses. Oh, okay. So I'm getting this picture.
And this is in keeping with your philosophy from Cabramatta and after reading The Art of War and getting to know the enemy.
So, and of course I have experts who've been around this world for years in the Gang Squad. So I'm drawing on them and drawing on people like Darren and Dave and others, so okay. So I'm starting to get a visual picture about these people, their history, why they belong and all this stuff. And then we had some laws and we said, well, why don't we just, and then threw it open because these guys have been policing this for some time and they've got really amazing, best ideas come from the floor.
Yeah.
So why don't we just take out everything that they like? Can we do that, do you think? I think they looked at me like, what? Why don't we just... And that's when I got there, they were just... there'd been a couple of things like we had the new consorting legislation because they like to hang out together. It had gone to it was accepted that they can't... It's a bit complex, but known criminals can't associate together, but they get a couple of warnings. So innocent people can't associate with criminals. Yeah. So they had the Nomads mounted a high court challenge on the constitutional validity of being able to associate. And I hadn't been there that long, and I know it was upheld at the High Court that yes, it's a valid law. And I remember the response that it was led by Dave Adney in particular, because that very weekend, the rebels, our biggest gang at the time, led by Alex Vella, was planning a national run from Sydney to Coffs Harbour, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Yeah. So I think it was on a day before we got the finding coming down. So there was a bit of propaganda put out that they're going to set up cages and they're all going to be jailed, and they're all going to be put in these things that if you associate. So obviously that was never true. There's a whole complexity with consorting, but there was enough fake news, I guess, out there that got them worried, and that national run was cancelled. And now we haven't had a national run in New South Wales since the consorting law.
I think the public can identify with that, because I remember going away on holidays and seeing hundreds or a big group of bikies riding up the highway round in colours, and you're not seeing it anymore.
Yeah, and we help our brothers and sisters out in other states by manning the borders. We're a bit like now, we close the borders if they're going to try and do they used to try to do the
closed borders.
They used to try to do the rat run down to other states that they didn't have these strong laws.
And they get their bikes shipped down and then want to ride around in another state.
And come back. So, and then other laws such as another young fella, I call them young fellas, they're probably all young to me, as a senior constable said, look, I found this old law from 1947. And I said, what's that? He said, well, they used to have sly grog houses at the cross, and everyone used to think they were plotting. It was post-war, plotting, overturn politics and stuff, and it's illegal to sell alcohol without a licence. And so under this Act, the Restricted Premises Act, you can go in with a warrant to gather evidence of illegal sale of alcohol. And other things. So the government strengthened it for us. So we also got included firearms and ammunition and explosives, which meant you could go in. So Raptor then would gather evidence of them selling alcohol.
And describe a typical bikie clubhouse.
They range, some not so flash, but some of them amazing, as in lots of big money. But a standard clubhouse would look at, often in a warehouse type of arrangement or industrial area, it would often have a boxing ring sometimes. It would have a stripper pole, it would have a stage, it'd have a bar like, a club bar, full club bar, pool tables, their insignia. Often, if I look at the Gladiators, and nothing compares to the Gladiators. The Gladiators is one of the oldest clubs.
Now, that was a rather sad part in your book.
Yeah.
You liked the Gladiators.
I did.
They were the old style
I
bikers.
tried to convince them to say,
but
just
you
drop
couldn't let
the
them
one.
be the 1%ers.
Just drop the 1% outlaw. It'd just be a social club.
Yeah.
But they, unfortunately, maybe through pressure from within their own club, they have never done that. So, but they aren't. They're certainly not. In my view, they're quite localised and they're not up there with the Hells Angels Comancheros. It's the Hills.
So those clubhouses, and what would go on in the clubhouses?
Well, it would be like they have this thing called church night. I don't know why they call it church night. It was on a Friday.
Yeah.
And so members were invited, or sometimes they'd open it up for parties to bring guests, and they would have a stripper. I never went to one, so I don't know what actually. This is what I've told. It goes on. Obviously, they would, I believe, do drugs there. Certainly, there was drugs for sale, but also more importantly, they would buy alcohol. So just like a normal
club
licensed premises, but of course didn't have a license. And social, and of course, my concern or our concern was that not only do they feel secure in this environment because they would wear their colours and they could, I would suggest talk about criminal activity where they feel very secure. It's only club members or people that obey club rules because there's very strict rules. So the idea was they love their clubhouses. They pay $50, fees to go there, etc., which all goes to the president or to the hierarchy. So our thoughts were, why not use this law to, gather evidence about they're running this, unlicensed premises. But also the other side of it was it does take away, it attacks them at their culture.
That is their culture, and like the clubhouses were like a fortress too.
Yeah,
I've been in quite a few clubhouses, and they'd have lookouts there, guarding. It was almost childlike, like guarding the fort.
Well, the one the Gladiators actually had a gun, like a something at the
gun
high show, the gun
thing.
turret,
Yeah.
And it's above the pool. And I remember asking, I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Lifeguards tower."
It's it's a strange world. So
It is.
when you got those powers, and then and I've seen the results of it, where you've gone through clubhouses and taken everything that represents the things that are dear to them, and you're not doing it illegally, you're not doing it over the top, you're using powers that really hit them hard where it hurts. So you take the alcohol, you take the emblems, you take the stripper pole, you
To get the evidence of what they were doing at these places. Yeah.
and that's gathering the evidence. What was the response like with that? Because that
Well, I think today we don't have any, except a couple like the Gladiators still exist.
Yeah.
But we don't have any of these pop-up sort of clubhouses.
Yeah.
They tend to do it in their backyards now, or they might just set up one or meet at a hotel when they could. So I think they dismantled in the state over just on 70 clubhouses all up in that period of time, like 2 years. So highly successful strategy because, but I remember their response was, I remember we were doing a whole lot there was a whole lot of shootings going on up at Newcastle, and there was a sign on the door to one up there, don't bother coming because we've already gone. And I thought, you know what, guys?
is that they left it.
Yeah,
to you guys.
Don't bother knocking. We've already gone. They'd cleared it out themselves.
Beautiful.
And I thought, you guys are amazing because the message has got through. So I think the laws, it's about thinking smarter, not necessarily working harder. For example, we've touched like the consorting laws. They can't associate. The restricted premises, so the clubhouses don't exist. We've looked at tattoo parlour legislation. They've got to be get a fit and proper person to be able to open a business like that. And if you're a biker, you're obviously not going to be a fit and proper person. Being engaged in combat sports, you also have to be a fit and proper person to hold those. So we're starting to do everything they hold dear is, well, hang on a minute, what's the point of being a bikie? I can't really hang out with my mates. I can't go to the clubhouse. I can't run a tattoo parlour. I can't be engaged necessarily in UFC or combat sports. This is not, the romance of bikie world is not looking so good.
Thinking outside the square and innovative policing, and I know it got to the point where some bikies just handed in their colours and said, "What's the point?"
Yeah, and we see that more often. And we would never necessarily accept that because. They're not. Once you hand in your colours, you've also got to pay the club $10,000, and you've got to get rid of any tattoos of the club. And see all of that weird stuff. But I think the most important thing is that you have to keep the pressure up on these people because let's face it, outlaw motorcycle gangs have been around since 1943.
Yeah.
So if you and they've been resilient. The people come and go like any major organised crime group. The people can come and go, but the banner of outlaw motorcycle gangs is so resilient that they'll just wait and they just hang around and then they'll wait for a new group to come through. And I think one of the most important successes is just indications. You're always looking for indicators of success. Is the community confidence, but also the visibility, but also the senior members that were in it purely for nothing to do with the love of the brotherhood and that. It was purely about money. Have gone offshore.
Well, that's interesting.
Because the environment, my words were, we have to create as hostile environment for which they can operate. And Darren would say it's called consequence-based policing.
Run that past me again.
Consequence-based policing model.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it. It's and what that is, it's an umbrella that encapsulates every strategy that we would use to disrupt them and suppress their activities.
Yeah. He doesn't say much, Darren, but when he does, it carries something.
Yeah, it does. I listen to every word.
And taking on the bikies, in your view, what was the importance of taking on the bikies? Because you speak to the bikies and go, "Oh, we don't do anything. We're not harming anyone." What was the importance of taking on the bikies?
Well, it's that whole figure of intimidation. And when if I look at, for example, what happened in Newcastle, okay, we're just a bunch of guys. Newcastle groups probably weren't they were the nomads up there. They've been around there a while, but they're not probably serious organised crime as a lot of the groups are. But the risk being the Finks, who were making a move on the territory because of what do you want to get in regional areas? Drugs. Yeah. Drugs is money. So the Finks thought, well, we're just wanting to expand. We're from Sydney based. We'll move up there. Well, of course, there's pushback. So what happens? I think we did over a 6-week period, a huge amount of shootings. But what hit home for us, apart from investigating all of that usual drive-by shooting stuff, they fired through a premises that was a set of units, but not high-rise, but back, with a high-powered weapon that went through 2 units to the 3rd unit, I think it was, and there was a 12-year-old boy home from school who was sick, laying on the lounge. The bullet embedded in the wall behind him.
Yeah, just total disregard.
So, you go, that this is, you talk tough and you think, but this is when it's, the community doesn't deserve this. And and you're self-declaring yourselves. You're outlaw motorcycle gangs. You're not a group of social club like the others, like the Hogs and the Ulysses.
And part of the innovative stuff that's also kept, and you talked about the rebels and Alex Vella, the president, he's stuck over in Malta. And that was another initiative that emanated from the gang squad.
Well, the best thing ever happened was around that time when just before I got there, it was already initiated by my counterparts for the rebels to really take on the rebels any way we can. It was so successful that we morphed that into this national task force called Morpheus. So what would, in simple terms, what all my colleagues would sit around every month and share information on an operational level, not necessarily a policy level, but also we brought to the table the most important partners, which was obviously the federal police, because we've now got these networks offshore, who are also important to bring to our table. People like Centrelink. We also brought to our table, which is that we can use a whole lot of things. One of the most important was Border Force, hence the cancellation of visas. Maybe New Zealand's not real happy with us, but it was about making our community safe. And, of course, one of the most important people to sit at our table, the pen is mightier than the sword. a representative from the taxation department.
Ooh,
they
hurts.
feared the taxation department.
Everyone fears the taxation department.
They'd say to me, they'd go out and they'd do a raid and they go, and I had an amazing guy from the tax department working with us. He was
How exciting would that be for a bloke from the taxation
he was
department?
a gun, like, mate, I think he wanted to put on a bulletproof vest a few times. But he'd go out because they'd find a lot of cash, and they'd say, oh no, we know that you guys are coming through the door, but we worry about the bloke with the briefcase.
Yeah, the little nerdy guy carrying the briefcase
amazing,
in the glass.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's funny. The strategies put in place, they were recognised overseas.
Yeah, we actually, what we used to do is, which is the beauty of, again, it's a partnership. Everything has to be in policing a partnership. And we got laws we brought in from the UK, the serious crime prevention orders. But what happened was when they have an international conference every year in America, what's invited from all around the world, and people working in this targeting outlaw motorcycle gangs go to this conference and share ideas and case studies, etc., and how it's really, really strongly about sharing information worldwide. And we would regularly, this consequence-based policing model was regularly, because it's like, wow, this is so unusual. Like these powers, we have really, really good powers here, good laws. And they were really envious, to the point that year on year they were invited to present different aspects of this laws. And last year we were lucky enough to get the Law Enforcement World Award for Raptor.
Oh, that's great. I think that the work that Raptor have done, and I've been saying it for a long time, because I saw how we were just toothless tigers before Raptor came along, and the difference they've made. And I love it when they change the landscape of the criminal world, and they certainly have a lot of hard-working police in there, and people wanted to get there, and that was good, because they saw the work that they've done.
And innovation, some of these laws that they're using, they're really smart laws, and again, we were talking earlier before about the complexity of policing these days. These laws aren't simple to negotiate around. They have to navigate, and you've got, they can afford really, really good lawyers to navigate, counter it. So you really have, the guys and the girls have to be really on their game about what the evidence they're gathering, the briefs they're presenting, and working through that.
But it is about evolving and looking at the challenge and taking a different step. Your career, you've been, I'd say, fortunate, because you've been in places with at the cutting edge, like Cabramatta, Meox, Bikies, all that. Have you got a favourite time in your career?
Oh, I suppose my favourite time. My favourite time would still be. I do have too many of them to talk about, but I think still my favourite would have been the way I ended it, with the work being done by Strikeforce Raptor, and because I could see the results, and of course I think the two would be the Cabramatta period, the way that it was a small group of detectives and what they were facing, and it was flying under the radar for all those years. And I think
it's a tough question. I shouldn't, because it is hard to put your favourite time, because you've got good parts on all. But even your retirement, and look, I want to reflect on it, because it was such a tribute. The fact that the guys went down there when you marched out of the academy. When you retired it was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah. I didn't know.
Big things.
They said they were down there doing training, because they go to train at the academy for their weapons and etc. And I didn't know, and I get a call, because I go down the night before, and I always spend it with the band and whatnot. They rang me and said, "Oh, Deb, we're down here because we did training today, so we're just going to go for a tie. Do you want to come down?" And I went, "Oh, okay." So I went to Thai, and the whole of Raptor and my intelligence team were there. Yeah. They took over the Thai restaurant and presented me with a beautiful plaque, not the traditional one. There's pictures of bits of, and there was bits of uniform in the plaque of all the ex-Raptor people. One's stripes, someone's badge. It was so special. And then I thought that was it. And then when I'm waiting to march off the parade ground on that last day, and I could see Raptor in their 2 blues, so they were in their, full uniform in there, and I thought, what I'm saying is, come over here, like there's seats here, and I could see, I'm ringing Darren, he'd go, "No, we're right, ma'am," and they stood to attention, and as we marched off, the band said, "We're going to keep marching," because normally you stop at the end of parade ground, and they said, "But we're going to keep going," and I'm with my other 4 colleagues retiring. And I said, apparently we've got to keep marching. I don't know, it must be changed the rules. And as we marched off the parade ground itself, the Raptor men and women had formed a guard of honour for us all.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Lovely.
You'd obviously, listening to you, I can see the joy you've had from your career. You would recommend joining the police?
Look, one of the reasons to do the book, I was pretty reluctant to do it because I didn't really think there was really a story to tell. One of the reasons, talking to Mark Murray, who's the author, who we've been friends for 30 years, he said, you may not think that, Deb, because you've lived it, but what about the other women coming behind you? Because you had role models from your previous women who were role models. Don't you at least need to sort of say to other women, it's great, take a chance, do it?
And I think it's an important message that you can join the police. You can still keep your individuality. You can still be the person you are, and you can have a successful and rewarding career.
It goes right back to that very first day I walked into Blacktown Police Station, and I met a second-class Sergeant, Joan Steadman, from the old school, who transitioned to the front line but was a station sergeant only. And her first words to me on that very first day was, Deb, never compromise your integrity or your femininity. Yeah. Remember, you're a policewoman, not a policeman.
That's a excellent way to finish, Deb, and good advice. And,
it was good advice.
I think hang on to that type of advice. But I've loved talking to you. We could go on for another couple of hours, but there's time limits. But look, thank you so much for coming on I Catch Killers. And I think if people are looking for inspiration on how to make a difference in the police, because that's what I like about the fact that you didn't conform to everything the police wanted. You weren't the typical person in the police, but you marched your own beat and you managed to do it successfully. So congratulations.
Thanks
for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
This podcast series is brought to you by True Crime Australia. Visit icatchkillers.com.au for additional material such as articles on what you heard, videos and galleries. You can search for the I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin official group on Facebook and join in with discussion. See you for the next episode of the podcast.